In the smoke-filled battlefields of the American Civil War, one name sent chills down the spines of friend and foe alike: the Iron Brigade. Known for their black hats, fearless charge, and unmatched discipline, these Midwestern warriors earned a reputation as the Union's deadliest shock troops. But how were they forged? The origins of the Iron Brigade trace back to 1861, when fierce young volunteers from Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan rallied to President Lincoln's call. Drawn from rural towns and farms, these men were united not by birth, but by belief. In the Union, they were disciplined, proud, and ready to fight. They were issued tall black Hardee hats instead of the standard blue kepi, earning them the nickname the Black Hat Brigade. These distinctive hats became their symbol, an intimidating sight on the battlefield. Where they marched, whispers followed. These men weren't ordinary soldiers, they were iron-willed warriors in Union blue. Unlike many green regiments, the Iron Brigade was drilled relentlessly. Under the command of regular Army officers like General John Gibbon, they were molded into a unit that valued discipline, marksmanship, and unity. Their training was not glamorous, but it made them lethal when it mattered most. Under fire. Their first major deployment was in Northern Virginia. Though untested in large battles, they quickly proved themselves in minor skirmishes. At places like Gainesville and Lewinsville, they demonstrated nerve, resilience, and precision. Officers across the Army of the Potomac began to take notice of this unusually steady brigade from the West. As more engagements followed, their bond deepened. They stood shoulder to shoulder not just in formation, but in spirit. Cold nights, shared rations, and letters from home wove them into a brotherhood. They weren't just regiments from different states, they were now one iron force. The enemy would soon come to know it. By the winter of 1862, word spread through Union camps: if you saw black hats advancing, dig deep. The Iron Brigade wasn't just a unit, it was a reputation carved into gunpowder and grit. Their legacy had begun, forged not in metal, but in Midwestern hearts and battlefield courage. The Iron Brigade's legend was sealed not by parade drills or rumors, but in fire and blood. Their first true trial came on August 28, 1862, at a quiet Virginia clearing called Brawner's Farm, where discipline met destiny, and the Black Hats earned their place in Civil War history forever. As part of General John Gibbon's brigade, they marched with the Union Army during the Northern Virginia campaign. Believing they were chasing a retreating Confederate force, they instead walked into an ambush. Hidden behind the tree line was Stonewall Jackson's battle-hardened division, lying in wait for the kill. The Iron Brigade deployed rapidly, forming firing lines without hesitation. What followed was a brutal 2-hour firefight at nearly point-blank range. The men of the 2nd and 7th Wisconsin, 19th Indiana, and 24th Michigan faced veterans of Jackson's infamous Stonewall Brigade in a savage, grinding musket battle. Smoke blanketed the field, trees splintered from volleys of lead, soldiers fired until their barrels burned hot, then kept firing. There were no trenches, no cover, just grit and resolve. The Union lines refused to yield, even as casualties mounted. Confederates were stunned by the sheer stubbornness of these black-hatted Midwesterners. By nightfall, the fields were soaked with blood. The Iron Brigade had lost nearly 1/3 of its strength, but it had not broken. Jackson, one of the Confederacy's most respected generals, had been checked. The South had underestimated them. This was not a typical brigade. It was something far more dangerous. News of their stand spread like wildfire. Northern newspapers praised their courage. Army commanders took note. From that day on, the Iron Brigade was no longer just a new unit from the West. It was a steel wall, feared by enemies and respected across the entire Union Army. Brawner's Farm was not a major strategic victory, but it was a moral one. The Iron Brigade had passed its baptism by fire. In 2 hours of unimaginable fury, they showed America what Midwestern resolve looked like. They would never be the same again, nor would the enemy. September 17, 1862. As the rising sun pierced the fog over Sharpsburg, Maryland, the Iron Brigade stood at the edge of a cornfield. What awaited them was not rows of golden stalks, but a killing ground. This would be Antietam, America's bloodiest. Single day, and the Iron Brigade's crucible of courage. General John Gibbon led the brigade into the fight as part of General Hooker's Corps. Their objective was to smash through Confederate lines by seizing Miller's cornfield, a deceptively peaceful stretch of farmland. The Iron Brigade formed ranks and stepped forward into a wall of death and fire. As the Iron Brigade entered the cornfield, musket volleys erupted from Confederate forces concealed inside. The tall stalks offered no cover, only confusion and chaos. Visibility was near zero. Men fell in clusters, the air filled with smoke, screams, and the thunder of relentless gunfire from both sides. The 2nd Wisconsin, charging through the field, was nearly annihilated. Every regiment suffered catastrophic losses, but they pressed forward, their discipline holding as bullets tore through ranks. Gibbon, on horseback, rallied the men with steely calm. Confederate soldiers would later recall the Iron Brigade's advance as the most fearsome sight imaginable. The carnage was staggering. Bodies piled between the corn rows. Officers fell beside privates. The Iron Brigade took over 1,000 casualties in minutes. But they held their line. They had advanced farther than any other Union unit in the early morning assault, though at a terrible cost. Despite their sacrifice, the cornfield changed hands multiple times that morning. No ground was permanently held. Yet the Iron Brigade's stand proved vital in weakening the Confederate center and setting the tone for the brutal day ahead. Their courage became the yardstick by which others were measured at Antietam. That day, the Iron Brigade became legends. Their shattered ranks and bloodied flags told a story no words could match. Antietam baptized them again, in a field of corn, soaked in blood, under the rising sun. They had given everything, and in doing so, etched their name into the soul of a nation. As the summer sun rose over the Pennsylvania hills, the Iron Brigade once again found itself at the edge of history. It was July 1st, 1863, the first day of Gettysburg. With black hats gleaming, they marched toward the sound of gunfire, unaware they were heading into the war's turning point. The Iron Brigade was among the first Union units to arrive west of Gettysburg. Ordered to support cavalry under pressure, they rushed toward McPherson's Ridge. Their disciplined lines and tall, Hardee hats struck fear into the advancing Confederates. They would not hold the line. They would define it. Leading the charge was General John Reynolds, commanding our corps. As he rode forward to position troops, a Confederate bullet struck him down, one of the Union's finest leaders killed within minutes. Still, the Iron Brigade pressed on, their grief steeled into fury as battle erupted all around. In the wooded areas near Herbst's Woods, the Iron Brigade collided with Confederate brigades under General Archer. The fighting was immediate and ferocious. The Iron Brigade captured Archer himself, one of the first Confederate generals taken in the war. Their reputation for relentless aggression grew with every musket fired. Despite early success, the Union line stretched thin. The Iron Brigade held their ground for hours against waves of Southern attacks. Shells exploded, smoke smothered the eye, sun and screams tore through the woods. McPherson's Ridge became a graveyard, but still, the black hats would not yield. Eventually, with ammunition dwindling and flanks collapsing, the order came to retreat. It was controlled, but bloody. The Iron Brigade had lost over 2,200 men, nearly half its strength. Yet their stand delayed the Confederate advance, buying time for reinforcements and anchoring the Union defense of Gettysburg. Though July 1st ended in retreat, the Iron Brigade's legacy was forever sealed. Their resistance helped set the stage for the Union victory to come. At Gettysburg, they didn't just fight, they endured, and in doing so, wrote another chapter in the fierce saga of America's Iron Sons. By 1864, the Iron Brigade was no longer fresh. Years of brutal combat had thinned its ranks and tested every ounce of resolve. Yet as General Ulysses S. Grant took command of Union forces, these battle-hardened veterans prepared once more to march into the fire, tired, bloodied, but never broken. Under Grant, the Union adopted a new strategy: relentless pressure. The Iron Brigade joined the Overland Campaign, a brutal series of battles across Virginia. From the tangled forests of the wilderness to the bloody trenches of Cold Harbor, there would be no pause, only grinding, constant combat. In early May, the Iron Brigade entered the Battle of the Wilderness, a chaotic fight in dense woods. Smoke and flames mingled as the forest caught fire around wounded men. Visibility was near zero. The Iron Brigade's discipline allowed them to stand firm where lesser units dissolved into panic. Soon after, at Spotsylvania Courthouse, they faced trenches, sharpshooters, and torrential rain. For days, they fought in knee-deep mud, their black hats soaked and sagging. Every charge met a hail of bullets. They gained little ground, but never gave in. Persistence had become their signature. June brought Cold Harbor, a massacre remembered with dread. Union troops assaulted fortified Confederate positions. The Iron Brigade joined the doomed attack. Within minutes, thousands fell. Survivors dug in, enduring sniper fire and unbearable heat. It was a battle of attrition, not glory, and it scarred every man who lived. By summer's end, the Iron Brigade was a shadow of its former self. Casualties mounted with each battle. New recruits filled the ranks, but the soul of the unit lived on in the few who remained from its early days, men who had marched from Bull Run to Cold Harbor. The Iron Brigade of 1864 was no longer the same in number, but its spirit had only hardened. Though worn and thinned, they were still feared, still resolute. In a war where endurance mattered more than spectacle, the Iron Brigade proved that iron isn't just forged, it's tested again and again. Behind every charge, every stand, every loss were men who defined the Iron Brigade. These weren't nameless soldiers. They were fathers, farmers, immigrants, and heroes. Their courage and resolve, etched into memory through their deeds, forged a reputation that far outlasted the battles themselves. These were the faces of iron. Brigadier General John Gibbon was the architect of the brigade's identity. A West Point officer and artilleryman, he trained the Midwestern volunteers into a disciplined fighting force. He gave them their signature black Hardee hats and drilled them hard, transforming civilians into elite soldiers feared by the Confederate ranks. General Solomon Meredith, a towering Indiana farmer known as Long Sol, succeeded Gibbon. By Gettysburg, Meredith personally led the Iron Brigade during its historic stand. Wounded in battle, he refused to be evacuated until his men were safe. His courage made him a legend among his troops. Among the ranks were countless unsung heroes. Captain Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin wrote gripping first-hand accounts that preserve the soul of the brigade. At Gettysburg, he led a charge that captured a Confederate regiment. His words later immortalized the bravery and brotherhood that defined the unit's legacy. Colonel Edward Bragg of the 6th Wisconsin emerged as a fierce fighter and respected leader, known for rallying troops under fire. His resolve in battle and political career afterward made him one of the most recognized veterans of the Iron Brigade. He personified the warrior-citizen ideal. Then there were the fallen, General John Reynolds, who died placing the Iron Brigade at Gettysburg, the thousands who wore the black hat into battle and never returned. Their sacrifice wasn't recorded in medals, but in blood, silence, and the haunted eyes of those who lived on. The Iron Brigade was more than a military unit. It was a brotherhood shaped by leadership, bound by shared suffering, and immortalized through character. These faces, famous or forgotten, breathed life into the name. Without them, there would be no legend, no iron, and no brigade worth remembering. The guns fell silent in 1865, but the story of the Iron Brigade had only just begun. From the smoking fields of Gettysburg to hometown cemeteries across the Midwest, their sacrifice endured. They were remembered not only in history books, but in bronze, blood, and reverence passed from generation to generation. In the decades that followed, monuments rose on battlefields where the Iron Brigade had bled. Gettysburg's McPherson's Ridge bears one of the most iconic, a soldier in a black Hardee hat facing west, rifle in hand, eternal in his vigil. It is not just stone. It is memory carved in defiance. Veterans returned home changed, many bearing wounds that never fully healed. Reunions were held across Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. Former brothers-in-arms gathered in faded uniforms, trading stories of lost friends and savage battles. Their bond, sealed in combat, lasted long after the final volleys of war faded. Memoirs. Like Rufus Dawes' Service with the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers offered the world a first-hand look into the courage and cost of war. These writings preserved not only facts, but emotion, the grief, rage, pride, and heartbreak that numbers and dates could never fully express. The brigade's influence extended beyond remembrance. It became a symbol of unity, resolve, and sacrifice. New generations of soldiers studied their tactics. Civil War reenactors proudly donned the black hats. In military academies, their grit was cited as an example of discipline and valor under extreme pressure. Yet the legacy was also personal, carried in worn photographs, family tales, and the names etched on gravestones. Every man who served left behind a ripple of history. Some were celebrated in newspapers, others faded into silence. But all carried the weight of the brigade's iron name. Today, the Iron Brigade lives on not just in statues or textbooks, but in what they represent. When we speak of courage, we invoke their name. When we visit the places they stood, we feel their presence. They were forged in fire, tested in blood, and remembered forever. Not as myth, but as men. Thanks for watching The Forgotten Past. If you enjoyed the journey, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a hidden story or untold truth. New discoveries await. See you in the next video.